Good afternoon. My name is Dr. David Parker, and I appreciate all of you joining us today for our third webinar. Our topic today is Top 10 Strategies for Making a Smooth Transition to College. So we'll spend a few minutes here just sort of getting organized, welcoming everybody, and previewing what we'll do before sort of diving into the content. I'm very pleased to be following in the footsteps of my two CRG colleagues, Dr. Julie Steck and Dr. Sandy Burkhardt, who've launched this new approach to sharing information with our families and our community partners. Today's webinar is a third of the three that we have planned for now. And I'll just preview that after the conclusion of today's webinar, you will receive online, I think immediately afterwards, a very brief evaluation form. We very much welcome and appreciate the time that you'll take to fill that out, to give me feedback on today's presentation, but also to help all of us here at CRG think about moving forward in meeting your needs in terms of whether we should continue offering these types of webinars, if so, on what topics, during what times, and those sorts of things. So again, I'd like to welcome all of you and continue previewing what we're going to be doing today as we dive into this important topic. Let's do a little bit more housekeeping at first, and then we'll preview the agenda. Really, the housekeeping is to just, again, be aware of what I just said about the survey at the end and our interest in moving forward in case you want to share any more feedback with us. You should have on the right side of your screen a control panel that has at least a couple of things in there that might be of interest. One is there is a chat window at the bottom, and I'm working with my colleague Jessica Rumpel, our front office coordinator, who is at her computer, and she will be watching and responding to any comments or questions you want to post throughout the webinar today. So feel free to just type in any questions. If you're running into any tech issues, just type that, and Jessica can just silently get back to you right away and try and help. Throughout the webinar, if you have any questions for me, feel free to post those as well. The very last slide will just be a Q&A slide, and I want to save a few minutes at the end of our presentation today to see if any of you have posted any questions or made any comments. I'll read those so everybody can hear them and do my best to answer them. You'll also see in your control panel an area where you can access a PDF version of today's slides. So you can download those to your computer during our presentation today if you'd like. Please know as well, and this is already true for both Dr. Burkhardt and Dr. Steck's presentations, that you can go to CRG's website, and on the main page in the bottom, I think left-hand corner, you can also access copies of their PowerPoints there. On the upper right-hand corner of our main website is the link to our YouTube channel, and you can also listen to these presentations afterwards as often as you'd like. If you have friends or family members or maybe any of your children's teachers or other providers would be interested in these topics, we hope that this will be of some interest to you moving forward. Okay? So I believe those are all the sort of housekeeping issues. I hope the technology is working for you. You might want to turn your volume all the way up. I think that might affect the extent to which you can hear me talking, and we'll go from there. In terms of the agenda for today, a couple of sort of framing issues to start with. First of all, I just invite us all to think about going off to college is very much about transitions. And whether we've been to college or not, we've all been through major transitions in our life. So whether we've, moved and bought a new home, whether we've started a new job, whether we've gotten married, anytime we go through a big transition, of course, it's equally exciting and kind of scary at the same time, or it can be for many of us. Going off to college is very much that for the young people in our lives who are interested in helping by participating in today's webinar. So they're very excited, they're probably also very anxious, and that's all very normal. When human beings go through transitions, we know a couple of things in general tend to be very helpful. One is prior knowledge, and the other is flexibility. So as we go through the slides today, let's be thinking about what prior knowledge will help young people know what to expect during their first semester, their first year in college. let's also think about how we can support them in being flexible and maybe adapting their sense of how they're doing or what they want to be doing or should be doing so that they can make smart and real-time decisions during a semester that does tend to fly by quickly and that gives them very limited formal feedback on how they're doing. That's often the key to what can trip up a new college student, as some of us may know from our own experiences. So with that framework in mind, we'll look today at several points. We'll talk first of all about the good news about today's undergraduates, and there's a lot of good news about their experiences as a group. We'll also talk, this group is referred to, as you probably know, as the Millennial generation. We'll talk about some unique challenges that the millennials are facing as they go through college and how colleges are trying to help them with that and how parents and other people in their lives can too. We'll talk also about some significant differences between how high school works and how college works, and both are good and both are very important and relevant to their own settings and goals. But the disconnect between how those two different educational arenas work can also trip up many bright, hardworking, conscientious students, again, if they don't know what to expect or they can't be flexible as they adapt to the new changes that college throws at them. We'll talk then about going through college in a self-determined way, and we'll talk a little bit more about what self-determination is, why it's important, and how we can promote that in young people. And then with all that context, we'll use the latter part of our presentation today to go through 10 specific strategies or suggestions that I'd like to offer that might be of some help. Finally, as I mentioned, we'll save some room at the very end for any other questions or comments that you might want to ask and have discussed. Before proceeding, and very quickly, just if you don't know who I am or haven't had a chance to visit my bio section on our website, just some very brief background so you have a sense maybe of even what questions you might want to ask. I spent most of my career working on college campuses, running the services for students with learning disabilities and ADHD. Of course, many of those students have also had anxiety, depression. I also have worked with students with Asperger's. That's been at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, the University of Connecticut, and Washington University in St. Louis. My PhD is in special education with a focus on college students. I did that work at the University of Connecticut. I do a lot of research, particularly about college students with ADHD, and I'm also a private coach. So the work that I do here at CRG is basically about either teaching students in high school or college study skills like how to take notes or study for tests or manage their time. The coaching work that I do here with high school, college students, and adults is to help students clarify and reach goals more effectively, whatever those goals might be. I also help families with the college search, not only in terms of finding a good fit college, but the services on a given campus. They're going to help that son or daughter succeed. So drawing upon all that experience, today's presentation is really for any college-bound student, or even maybe a student who started college and determined that it wasn't a good fit and they're kind of wanting to back up and start over. Given our work here at CRG, I'm going to drill down at times and talk about some issues specific to students with disabilities. But again, I framed today's presentation to hopefully help any college-bound student, whether they have the disability or not. So with that, let's go ahead and dive into the content. And we're going to start today with one of 3 polls, and that's simply a very brief and informal survey that will give all of us some real-time feedback. So as you can see, our first question today, our first poll, is we're curious to know a little bit more about who you are, and we know that some of you are listening and wearing several hats at the same time. So in just a moment, we're going to see some choices on the screen. And if you would be so kind as to click whichever ones fit you best, then we'll get some real-time feedback about who's in attendance today. So again, what role best describes you? You'll see that your choices are parent or family member, a high school educator, which could be anybody from a teacher to an administrator. Some of you might be at the college level, either as faculty or staff. Some of you might be clinical providers, such as a therapist or a psychologist. I would put an ADD coach in private practice in that category also. Some of you participating today may be students. So if you wouldn't mind taking a moment, we're seeing that a number of you have already voted. And at this point, it looks like just about everybody has voted. And for your information, it looks like 45% of you are a parent or family member. 25% of you are clinical providers, 20% are high school educators of one role or another. It looks like 10% are at the college level, and 10% are students. So welcome to all of you, and particularly welcome to those of you who are students listening today. Okay, let's dive into some of the content then. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the good news, and there's a lot of great news. We know, for example, that enrollment in degree-granting post-secondary institutions, so colleges or universities, is way up over the last 20 years. We think that the economy has played a big role with that. We know that the increase has gone up by nearly 40% from 1993 to 2013. We know that the population that is attending undergraduate institutions today is increasingly diverse, which I think is really good news. So that means more first-generation students, more students from minority backgrounds, more returning veterans, including wounded warriors who have sustained cognitive impairments in their service to our country. Certainly more and more students with disabilities are included in that mix too. So that's all great news. It speaks to the hard and successful work that high schools are doing to increase the percentage of students who not only graduate from high school, but who then go on to attend post-secondary institutions. We know that since 1970s, when about 3% of undergraduates reported disabilities, that nearly 11% report a disability today, which is, again, great news. We also know that there are many more students than that on campuses today with disabilities who for one reason or another have chosen not to report that they have a disability. So we're talking about a sizable group of students when we're looking specifically at students with disabilities, but we know that more and more campuses are seeing record enrollments from a very diverse group of students who have a diverse range of needs. The chart at the bottom, which is from the Fordham Foundation, was published last year, gives us a quick visual preview of the fact that since 2005, across the country, we've seen a quick uptake, a steep increase, in the academic preparedness of college-bound students who are starting off in college. So with reading and writing scores in particular, in response to the new emphasis at measuring proficiency in schools with standardized tests, we see that these students who are coming to college today out of high school are increasingly more academically prepared than they had been in the past. Their GPAs are up. The number of AP courses that new college freshmen have taken is up. The amount of extracurricular activities that students engage in high school are up. So again, lots of good news. More students, more diverse students, and more academically prepared students are coming into college today. So those of you who are working with college students know that in many ways this millennial generation is unique in a lot of positive ways. What we're also finding, though, as we look at the next slide, is that, again, this generation that's referred to by many as the millennial generation is also coming to college today with a number of very unique needs that are raising some concerns and are being studied carefully by many organizations and groups, including colleges. I know certainly from my work here with many families at CRG, I see firsthand how much pressure families feel today, and those of you in the audience who are parents or grandparents or their family members know this well too. But there's an increased amount of pressure to get into a good school in a way that I just don't think was the case for most college-bound students 20 years ago. We know, for example, that more students in high school today apply to a much larger range of colleges with the hopes of getting into a better school than has been the case in the past. With the students I work with anecdotally, it's not at all uncommon for me to hear that students are applying to 10, 12, 15 colleges, that they feel a great deal of stress about that, that the amount of recruiting that colleges are doing now with high school students, either in person or by mailing them, materials, trying to persuade them to come to their school, has increased. That there's a whole industry that also includes test prep organizations. And that creates both higher scores and grades, but it also increases the pressure that students going through that experience have when they're hoping to get into a good school. And that pressure can not only be contagious to their parents, but can be reinforced by their well-intended parents as well too. That, again, has pros and cons attached to it. Um, as a result of some of those trends and what kind of high school looks like today, we know that today's undergraduates also are experiencing a growing range of health issues, mental health issues, that we haven't seen or documented in previous generations. On screen, you'll see reference to a report that came out in 2012. This was a national study of several thousand undergraduates looking at mental health issues, and it really raised some flags. And I don't say this to scare anybody or to raise my own flags. It's simply to recognize that in today's undergraduate population, it is not at all uncommon that many of those students are struggling with mental health issues at one point or another in a way that we haven't fully understood or seen in the past. Just a few statistics that came out of the report I'd like to read. 25% of the several thousand students who were surveyed reported being treated for a mental health condition in the past year. 11% of the students in that survey had been diagnosed or treated specifically for anxiety over the past year, so from 2010 to 2011 when the data were being collected. 40% of the nearly 3,000 students in the report indicated that they were feeling a great deal of stress. 80%, 80, reported feeling overwhelmed more than once during that year. And 45% also feeling at least once rather hopeless about their ability to keep up with all of the work. So we don't know, because we haven't collected similar data, if previous generations also experienced this degree of distress emotionally. But we know that this generation they're reporting it and they're struggling to deal with it. And we need to be aware of that as we help these young people finish high school, find a good college, get into college, and thrive there. One of the ways we know that is that college mental health centers, campus counseling centers, for example, are overwhelmed these days by the number of students coming in and seeking their help. The good news about this information is that it normalizes that experience for the individual student who's dealing with it. They don't have to worry that they're the only person on campus getting overwhelmed, dealing with anxiety or depression. The good news as well is that more and more campus resources are available to help students. They understand that this is a growing issue. We're also trying to understand why this generation seems to be struggling so during the transition in college, but more and more people are there to help and to have good tools to help students in offering that help. But a related issue is that more and more college students are demonstrating lower levels of what are called resilience and grit. And those are terms you're all probably familiar with, but again, increasingly, they're being studied and promulgated on campuses around the country. Resilience, in brief, is the ability to bounce back. It's the one-time capacity to sort of stand up, brush yourself off metaphorically, and get on with things. Grit, on the other hand, is a long-term capacity to stay passionate about something and to persevere at goals over time. So resilience is a component of grit. Resilience allows that college student, when they get a C- for the first time in their academic lives on a test during their freshman year in college, or even an F, to not panic and freak out, to say, wow, that went really badly. I thought I had done much better, and I certainly wanted to do much better. How can I recover from this? What are my options in terms of doing better on the next test? We need to promote resilience in students as they go off to college so that when those things happen, and they will by and large, that the student has the tools needed and or the resources available to them to get through that moment in time and to learn some important lessons that strengthen their capacity the next time they're in a similar situation. We also need to support and strengthen students' grit as they go through college to help them keep a focus on the long run, to see that grand prize at the end being graduation, a degree, persistence over time in college, and the launch of a successful career. For many students, finding a good major, a good fit, getting into that course of study their sophomore or their junior year, when now they're really studying something they're interested in. They're working with professors who are role models. They're starting to maybe engage in experiential learning as well, like internships, that are very related to a passion of theirs. That's where we see students engage in a lot of activities that strengthen their grit. But freshman year, as many of us know, freshman year is often simply about getting used to living on your own, maybe living with a roommate for the first time, getting used to managing a very episodic schedule for the first time, learning how to learn in a very different environment where there are very few grades and formal feedback about how you're doing for the first time, and frankly, simply taking a lot of required courses that may not be of interest. That year provides lots of moments in time where a student's resilience is key to his or her capacity to move forward. And we just need to be mindful of that and, again, support students with both aspects of emotional fortitude, knowing, again, that this generation is demonstrating a lot of challenges with that, whether they have a disability or not. You'll see a website there from Psychology Today in which a professor at Boston University talks in great detail about resilience and grit and gives us all a lot to think about. I invite you to take a look at that. Also, some of you may be aware of Angela Lee Duckworth. She's also a professor in research at the University of Pennsylvania and has done extraordinary work on the concept of grit. And one popular way that we can just learn a little bit more from Dr. Duckworth about grit is to watch her TED Talk, which is called Grit, the Power of Passion and Perseverance. So if any of you are interested in that concept and haven't seen that TED Talk, I invite you to go to YouTube and just type in that topic and watch that. Finally, and it's been the case for many generations, but since the big recession in 2008-2009, we know that the millennial generation is also facing the challenge of trying to find meaningful employment after graduation, and that families, given the rise of tuition, are struggling to understand that that investment is going to pay off with, a good job when the student gets out of college. The good news is that it's still the case that in general a person with a college degree over the course of their career earns almost 10 times as much as a student without a college degree. So we know that that college degree has lots of benefits, including over the long run, real economic gain, but there's certainly an economic investment to be made along the way as well as an emotional one. Okay. That brings us to our second poll, and again, I thank you for taking time a moment ago to answer the first one. The question that the second poll is asking about is give you a chance to just reflect on some of the issues we just talked about, and this is, there's not a right answer, it's more your opinion, but we're curious, what would you think is the biggest reason for college students' limited resilience? And as you can see, it may be that there are too many opportunities to recover from problems in high school. It may be that fewer high school students, which is factually true, are getting part-time jobs in high school as they focus on AP courses and other things to boost their resume academically. It may be that students get too much help from well-intended but anxious and possibly over-involved parents. It may be that we're living in a Facebook culture now where we only tend to publicize our success and not really think about, talk about, or deal with our challenges. Or you may think that there are other reasons. So if you could select just one, I appreciate your feedback on this. Looks like you're all giving this a lot of thought. I appreciate that. And I wish I knew the definitive answer, but student by student is probably the best way to think about that, and each student may have their own answer. 45%, I'm sorry, I'm going to bring my PowerPoint back up on screen here, forgive me. Bring that back up here. Okay, sorry about that. So again, 43% of you thought that parents with the best of intentions maybe were contributing to limited resilience. 19% of you thought that too many opportunities to recover from academic challenges in high school contributes to this. Equal numbers, 14% of you thought limited job or work experience, and also the Facebook culture phenomena contributed, and 10% of you thought there might be other reasons. So again, a real diverse range there, and there may certainly be other factors as well besides that. Thank you for taking time to give us your feedback on that. I'd like now to introduce the concept of self-determination, and let's keep in mind what we just thought about and discussed about resilience as we do so. Some of you may be familiar with this term, some of you, for some of you it may be a new term. The definition that you'll see on your screen that comes from a husband-wife research team at Wayne State, Sharon Field and Alan Hoffman. They happen to be mentors of mine and have studied self-determination for many years. Their definition is one that I like very much. They define self-determination as the ability to identify and achieve goals based on a foundation of knowing and valuing yourself. So as visual depicts, if we think about good self-esteem and good self-awareness as foundations for being self-determined, anything that we can do to help our young people going off to college better understand themselves, what their weaknesses are as well as their strengths, what their values are, what's important to them, what do they want to get out of college, why are they going to college, why are they going to college right now rather than, for example, taking a gap year that we'll talk about. What are their values? Do they want to help people? Do they want to make a lot of money? Do they want to change the world? Are they fascinated by research? Do they want to learn how to create the video games that have consumed their lives in high school? That foundation of self-awareness and self-esteem equips us to be more effective over time at planning, acting on goals, and then experiencing the outcomes of our actions and learning from them. That last phase in the self-determination cycle, experiencing outcomes and learning, is one that, frankly, I see college students engaging in very infrequently. You know, if they're not going 90 miles an hour, they're napping at 3 in the afternoon because they've been up until all night finishing that paper. Or they're coming home and doing laundry and, you know, enjoying the fact that we're feeding them while they're zoning out and doing something that doesn't require a lot of brain power. So I understand all of that. But anything we can do to help students learn from their experience, and not necessarily by telling them what we think they should have learned from their experience, but asking them honest questions and then really listening and just creating an environment in which they can pause and reflect for a little bit of time and realize, I didn't like how that experience maybe turned out, but boy, it taught me a lot of important things, and I'll take that new knowledge into my next experience. Just doing that with our students, our sons, our daughters, can be invaluable in promoting their self-determination. You'll see a website, beselfdetermined.com. That's Dr. Field and Dr. Hoffman's website. If you're interested in more of their research on self-determination, I invite you to visit that page. Why is self-determination important? Why are we even talking about it today? Respectfully, I'll invite you to think about the photograph in the upper corner as a herd of cows. I was trying to find a photograph that then showed another cow off to the side standing by itself and going its own way, and I didn't find that. But think about a self-determined person as a person who's not only unafraid, but is able to go to another part of the field and stand there confidently by themselves. It's a person who knows how to order off the menu at a restaurant. It's a person who listens to what's on the inside and is not afraid, and in fact takes joy in trying to create experience in his or her life that allow him or her to accomplish goals that are important to him or her. So it's a person who listens to advice, who seeks counsel, who uses resources, but who ultimately listens to their own counsel to pursue their own path. And in the research and literature that I've been reading on resilience and grit over the last year in college students, a lot of the literature is saying that that's the trait that we're not developing as strongly in young people as we used to. That the pressure to sort of get into a good school and the social contract, if you will, that high school students experience now, which is if I fill out my teacher's study guides and memorize what they're telling me is important, then I'll do well on the test, and if I do well on the test, I'll get into a good school. And if I don't do well on the test, my teachers will let me take it over until I do well on the test. And then in the process, what that really is doing at some level is teaching those teenagers, we know what's most important for you, do what we're telling you is most important, and things will turn out well. And again, due to the recession, I think that fear has been exacerbated by a generation that doesn't see wonderful careers immediately available after college. So unfortunately, what a lot of people are doing is saying, tell me what to do, tell me what the rules are to be successful, and I'll do that, rather than being supported to explore for themselves what matters to you, what would be a well-lived life, what are you passionate about, what do you dream about, what do you see yourself doing in 10 years is going to make you happy, how can we help you get there. those conversations are harder to have with many young people today because they don't have a lot of role models. They aren't asked those questions. And indeed, a lot of the feedback they get from those around them who are trying to help and help them in many important ways don't often invite them to think those kinds of thoughts because that's not as clean. That doesn't seem as safe. That's not as rule governed. So self-determination can, for many people, be a startling sort of new framework or way of thinking about how to support the emotional and academic growth of people as they go through high school and college. But the research tells us that it's really important and meaningful to do that work. We know from a lot of research, some of which is on Dr. Field and Dr. Hoffman's website if you're interested, we know that college students are more highly self-determined, have a number of important and positive outcomes, and a lot of research supports this. Number one, they utilize campus resources more effectively. They're more active consumers, if you will, of the writing center, of the tutoring center, because they know how to plan the use of help that will allow them to reach their goals. And if they don't the first time and they experience disappointing outcomes, they adapt their plan, they adjust that, and they start using those resources. We know that students who are more highly self-determined have higher grades. There are a number of studies that show that is a very strong link. We know that students who are more self-determined persist more effectively towards graduation at higher rates. They know how to get to where they're trying to go. They have grit, in other words. They're able to pursue their passion and to persist even when the going gets tough. And again, learn from experience, adapt along the way if they need to in order to reach that long-term goal successfully. Finally, we know from some research about what happens to students after they leave college is that, again, students who are more highly self-determined tend to report greater satisfaction in their jobs, greater financial independence, and are more likely to be living on their own. So again, whether the student has a disability or not, higher levels of self-determination really influence important life outcomes. So that might be something all of us want to learn more about as we're working with these high school and college students. Very briefly today, what are some general suggestions for helping students be more self-determined? Number one, supporting their choice making. We all want students to succeed, and if we hear a student say, I want to study something, and inside we think there's no way they can do that, or we see this student with a 2.3 GPA saying, I dream of going to Harvard and that's my goal, it can be tough to not want to redirect them to have what we consider to be more realistic goals. But to the extent possible, we want to support them in coming up with their own dreams and goals and then pursuing the knowledge they need to pursue that goal, including determining if that's realistic. As one example, when I work with students here at CRG and we're doing the college search process, if I hear those Ivy League choices coming out of a student's mouth who has, let's say, a 2.0 GPA, I say, good for you. Tell me more about why Harvard or Yale or Princeton is so exciting to you. And I listen very carefully because it tells me a lot about their motivation, how they see themselves, and what they ultimately want out of life. But then I say, let's go to a website called collegedata.com. Just one of many websites where you can actually look up what a given college requires GPA and SAT-wise of its incoming freshman class. So I say to the student next, well, wow, that sounds like a very lofty goal for you. Let's get some facts on what it's actually going to take for you to accomplish that goal. And by simply looking at the data, which may be the first time the student's actually seen what it takes to get into a school like that, they on their own can begin to go, oh, well, maybe I need to think of some other colleges as well. And then the work unfolds, but they're making the decision rather than me saying, there's no way you're going to get into Yale. Let's think of something more realistic. So providing choices is an engagement. It's not about us telling students what choices they need to make. It's about us supporting them and making those choices in a fact-filled way. We can also promote student self-determination by promoting their effort as well as their outcome. You know, and so this is again a student who maybe struggles all semester in chemistry class, and maybe they're getting A's and B's in the rest of their classes, and the best they can do in chemistry is a C-. We can panic about that, particularly if we think that C- is going to keep them out of Harvard or Yale, or we can honor the hard work that they put in all semester to do everything they needed to do to get that C-. And again, along the way, we can teach that student help them learn what is it like to persevere in the face of a very significant challenge. What resources can you use along the way to do the best you can in this situation? A third thing we can do to promote self-determination is to help students learn from their experiences, and I've shared a number of those examples. Again, the best thing I learned to do to try and help a teenager or young adult, and I'm not saying I do it well, but on my good days, is I do my best to try and be a good actor. And by that I mean I ask the student what they might do differently next time to have a better outcome. And I listen with utter surprise, even though usually what they say is something I thought about a long time ago. Why do I do that? Because people at that stage in their life have a hard time taking advice. We know that if we recall being there. We find it hard to think that older people know more than we do. So instead, the caring, listening ear that simply asks us, what did you learn from this? What might you do differently next time? Can I do anything to help you remember that insight the next time you appear to be in a similar situation? Can be a valuable role that teenagers allow us to play that can promote their self-determination. Finally, we know that building unconditionally supportive relationships, which we all have with young people that we're thinking about, I'm sure, is another important way that we can enhance student self-determination. We want them to be able to come and tell us when they're struggling, as well as to let us know when they're doing well. And teenagers and young adults, of course, are going to be apt to do that. We're all more apt to do that if we know that the person we're talking to is going to continue to think highly of us, not judge us, and care about us or even love us unconditionally. Okay, we're moving now into the segment where I want to go through 10 specific recommendations. These are the top 10 strategies, and just to provide a frame for this, in putting these together, largely from my own clinical experience over the last 25 years of working with college students and a lot of wonderful colleagues on many campuses, but also going back and looking at the research, one of the suggestions is going to be about good fit. 3 of the suggestions are going to be about attitude, and the remaining 6 suggestions are going to be specific behaviors. 5 of those will be for the student, 1 will be for parents or grandparents providing care to the student. So let's go into that now. So the first strategy, the good fit strategy, is to remember that there are all sorts of ways to do college right. Again, there's so much pressure on families today to find a good school, get into a good school, get out of a good school. Colleges are putting increasing pressure on students to finish in 4, meaning to get through the entire undergraduate experience in 4 years. So lots and lots of pressure. And we know that senior year of high school is often a huge social pressure on those students when everybody's talking about where did you apply, where did you get in, where are you going next year. Some suggestions, though, some options that I found over the years sometimes families aren't actively thinking about that might be actually the best fit for the particular student in mind. First of all, for some students, it may be very helpful for them to live at home their freshman year, to make the academics the real shift, the real transition. But getting up in the morning, managing my bills, eating healthy and on a regular basis, having some degree of structure around me that's going to be available at home, but probably not in the dorm, it might lead some families to decide that first year living at home is really the way to do it. And of course, that's if the college allows it. Many four-year institutions have a requirement that students live on campus their freshman year. Community colleges such as Ivy Tech here in Indiana are, again, a wonderful way to start college, whether it's to do a semester or a year there and then transfer, or to get an associate's degree and to be finished with college, or a certificate program that launches you much more quickly into a hands-on career, a trade, or to start out at Ivy Tech and at some point then to transfer to a four-year and to finish there. Again, for many students, that's a much better way to launch or do college. Classes tend to be smaller. The academic competition is typically not as high, and there may be more classes that speak to the student's interest rather than classes that just have to be taken to get them over with. So that's an option that you might look into. Online courses, whether it's part of the on-campus program, or the student, again, is perhaps living at home or on their own, but doing college online, at least to start with, might be a good option for some students. Of course, many of us who've taken online courses realize that it can be difficult to manage that from a self-regulation standpoint, so you should think about that cautiously but realistically. Finally, a growing number of students around the country are getting into college, deferring enrollment, and then taking what's called a gap year, spending a year before they go off to college, working, maybe taking class part-time, traveling, and growing up essentially, and being more emotionally ready before they start college for that experience. CRG offers a gap year. We're going into our second year with that. Dr. Dana Lassick and I co-run that. You can get more information on our website about that. The other information on this slide to mention briefly, those of you who might be working in high schools, you may be aware of the resource pictured in the upper right-hand corner. The Heath Resource Center publishes Guidance and Career Counselors Toolkit. That's specific to students with disabilities. I sometimes hear from families here at CRG that I think they get perhaps the mistaken message from high schools that if the student doesn't qualify for accommodations like extra time there at school, that they can't qualify for that on the SAT or ACT. The truth is it can be harder, but it is possible to do so. And the manual that you're seeing, but also the links to the SAT and ACT websites you have on the screen can tell you more about that. Taste of College is an informal name for summer programs for high school juniors or seniors before they go off to college, where they typically live on a college campus for a week or two. They take an abbreviated version of a course. They see what it's like to live in the dorm. They get a real hands-on taste of college. Can be a great way to help college-bound students really prepare for the transition that's ahead. When you're visiting campuses that you're checking out as your possible college choice, more and more colleges make it possible for this student to actually do an overnight visit, to stay over in a dorm. It's a safe situation. I encourage families to look into that so that, again, the student's getting a little bit of independence and a real visceral taste of what the environment's like as well as the challenges. And then certainly when you're going on your campus tours, be sure to set up appointments in advance and visit other people on campus who might be helpful to the student in question. If it's a student with a disability, that first and foremost should include the Disability Services Office. So again, being flexible, making college choices about where, when, and how that are specific to that particular student's needs, abilities, interest, and readiness is the #1 suggestion that I would like to make. Let's look at some attitudinal suggestions as well. So a second strategy would be to reframe challenges as growth opportunities. That goes back to the self-determination stage of experience, outcomes, and learn. None of us want students to struggle or to fail, but that's part of life. And the way that we support students when that happens can greatly bolster their resilience, their grit, their self-determination, their success. A number of campuses have set up websites that specifically promote their students' resilience, Harvard being one. And I invite you to visit when there's time the link that you see there for a wonderful essay called How to Have a Really Successful Failure. And they talk on that website about how even the brightest amongst us can have spectacular failures in life, but how the meaning you make of that experience can be an enormous learning experience. And so, you know, I say to students, whether you're going to Harvard or not, if they're failing at Harvard, that means it's okay for the rest of us too. It's not something to be ashamed of. It's what you do and learn from that experience that matters. Tip #3 is to help our students understand that it's the successful and indeed the smart students who use campus resources, whether that's tutoring, whether that's going to professors' office hours, whether it's the Disability Services Office. The successful students network well. They know how to be good consumers. They target their needs. They find the resource on campus with experts who can help them bolster their strengths in that need area, and they succeed. So the phrase student engagement for more than 20 years has been the name of the one quality that consistently predicts who will finish college. And student engagement simply means you get to know people on that campus. You leave your dorm room. You don't just go to class and then go back to your room. You become a member of that community. You network and get to know people. Other students, yes, but other professionals too. And that's what we want to promote in students as they start college. Dartmouth College has some wonderful videos on their website that I have the link to here that talk about note-taking strategies, time management strategies, test-taking strategies. And again, as I say to students here, if it's good enough for Dartmouth students, it's good enough for all of us. So you might look at that link and help students realize that there are offices that teach the kinds of skills they can get a preview of in these videos, and they're really smart to take advantage of that. That's particularly hard for students who have been successful in high school to get their head around. They have succeeded largely through their own hard work, and they think success in college is going to come from more of their own solo efforts. But college is a very different experience, and so that goes back to the initial framework of helping students adapt and monitor their progress accurately. Finally, for students with disabilities, as I've mentioned, using Disability Services Office is highly recommended. Go and meet with them. Become eligible. Even if you didn't use accommodations or qualify for them in high school, it's still possible to do that in college. College tests, college papers, college lectures are very different than they are in high school, or they certainly can be. So a student who maybe hasn't had to use accommodations in high school might be well advised to look into testing or learning accommodations, or even what are called auxiliary aids or services, such as being able to take 1 or 2 fewer classes but still be considered full-time for a semester, or getting a substitution in math or foreign language if that's where your disability really affects you. And being allowed to fulfill that requirement by taking other types of classes is something you can talk to the Disability Services Office about. So now we're to poll 3. This is the last poll that we're going to ask about today. Knowing the students that we're all talking about today, though, and knowing that there are many, many resources on campus that can help them, this question is the following. What do you think is the biggest reason why some students in college resist getting help? If you could take a look at those choices and log in with your answers, you'll see that it's limited grades complicate students' ability to recognize their need for help. Young people are optimists and think it will turn out okay. They believe they should be able to succeed on their own, the sort of solo lone wolf philosophy. Students are afraid to admit they need help, or some students are so overwhelmed by all the campus resources they don't even know where to start. We'll give you a minute to think about that and to log in your answer. And again, we know that it could be all of the above. Or for some students, it could also be other reasons as well, too. Okay, we're up to 91% of you have responded at this point, 96% of you have. Thank you again very much. And so what we have here is, let's see. We have 45% of you, the top choice, said that you think it's because students are afraid to admit that they need help. That's really interesting, and I can certainly relate to that. 27% of you said that they believe students believe they should be able to do this on their own. 23% said that you think that students are just so overwhelmed by all the options they don't know where to start. And 5% of you indicated that you think it's because students are optimistic and think things will turn out well. Yes, yes, and yes to all of that. So again, thank you for sharing that feedback. Okay, we'll go through the other choices and then we'll leave some room for any questions or comments at the end. These move now into behaviors, things that students can do. First of all, I encourage you to think about encouraging students during their first semester in college to give themselves some wiggle room. One way to do that is to deliberately over-enroll in 1 or 2 extra classes so that during drop out, that first usually 2-week period of the semester when any student can simply go online and drop a class or pick up a class and not have that create any problems on your transcript or have to pay any tuition, that you have more choice-making opportunity at that point. And again, that promotes your self-determination. You might minimize reading or writing heavy courses if those are areas of difficulty for you your first semester. If foreign language, for example, is going to be a real struggle for you, you might plan throughout your college career to only take those classes in the summer at, say, Ivy Tech or another local smaller college that allows you to transfer those credits back. Tip number 6 is to learn new ways to monitor your progress, and this is huge and a big challenge and where a lot of new students need help. Fewer grades mean your final grade is going to be based on just a few inputs, and it's going to be hard for you to monitor over the semester how you're really doing. Unlike high school, there are rarely are you given study guides or makeup work. So office hours are a huge way to go to get to know your professor, meet with them, show them your work, get their feedback on how you're doing. Online grade calculators, there are many, I have the link to just one here, can be a tangible way for a student to actually do the math and to know at any point in the semester, based on what grades they've received, how they're doing. For parents, a huge transition from high school to college is many parents now are accustomed to seeing their son or daughter's grades online in high school. That's harder to do in college, and something that frankly a lot of colleges discourage. So it may be harder for you to sort of monitor your students' grade once they get into college. My work here with students with technology often involves encouraging them, based on tip number 7, to personalize their technology. I'm amazed at the number of young smart students who use loads of devices who've never opened up the calendar feature on their phone, however, or have never explored that free software in their laptop that's called voice-to-text technology that allows them to simply speak to their computer and it types what they're saying with a high degree of accuracy. So even though students have a lot of technology, it doesn't mean that they figured out how to use the choices that will empower them to be successful. So that's an area where we can help them as well. My colleague here at CRG, Beth Waite-Lefevre, is an amazing AT specialist and speech-language therapist, and in particular, she can do evaluations and training for high school, college, or college-bound students to help them identify software, hardware, apps that can be of help, and if they want to help them learn how to use them. I do that, but not at the degree of expertise that Beth does. So, you know, lots of people can help you with that. One thing in particular that I kind of chuckle about is email. And I have to remember and not feel too old when I realize that college students today think email is so last millennium. They rarely check it, and yet when you go off to college, that's how the college and your professors are going to communicate with you. So helping students be aware of that, helping them set up folders in their email account to manage the hundreds of emails they'll get in their first month of college can be a good prep strategy as well too. Tip number 8 is to make class attendance a habit, and for many of us that may just be a given. But of course the gift of colleges is that they rarely take enrollment. And so what I try and do is to encourage a student to think about all the benefits they can get out of simply showing up for class. You can learn about 80% of what you need to know in class. Your professor can see you there. It can make it more comfortable to go and have office hours. Professors can announce changes or give examples or details that are not on the PowerPoint. They might make available to all students in the class online that will be on the test. Lots of benefits to being in the class. You can meet other students in the class with whom you can form study groups. Again, lots of benefits. Tip number 9 is to stay current in your class, and that means primarily to keep up with the readings. Again, you won't necessarily have quizzes on them, but you need to create the time and marshal the energy to do the reading as it's assigned. Importantly, get your homework done on time. And for those of you in classes that require papers, I encourage you, even if you're a good writer, to think about using the Writing Center on campus to hold you accountable for getting started early, for brainstorming topics, for coming up with a thesis statement, for developing an outline a week or two before the papers due. Once you get started, you may find it easier to persist rather than relying on yourself and finding that it's the night before the papers due before you actually get started. Finally, a behavioral tip for parents. I encourage you to do whatever you need to do to make that transition from supervisor to coach. That's really best to do during senior and high school, but certainly as your son or daughter goes off to college, you know, begin to ask rather than to tell. You know, consider scheduling weekly contact with your son or daughter, whether it's a Skype call, FaceTime, a phone call, but schedule it, you know, rather than sort of surprise your son or daughter with a call they weren't expecting, and check in with them. There's some resources on the screen as well that might help you with that. And remember that care packages are still cool and much appreciated, even if your son or daughter sort of rolls their eyes and says, you don't have to send me cookies or, you know, a Starbucks gift card. That's still an important part of coaching from afar. So a number of tips that I hope add to your toolbox as you think about ways you can promote transition success in the people that you care about or are working with. We're at the final slide, and at this point we're going to see if there are any comments or questions. while you take a minute maybe to type anything that you'd like for me to address, I would just direct your attention to a few things on the slide. First of all, thank you very much for attending today. We know how busy everybody is. We hope that doing this over the lunchtime and remotely made it somewhat easier for you to attend. You're seeing the specific links to a couple parts on the CRG website. One is to our newsletter. We publish that electronically 3 or 4 times a year. If you'd like to receive that, and a limited number of announcements throughout the year of new groups, new services, other events at CRG, you can sign up on our main page for all of that, but you can also just go to our website without signing up if you want and go to the newsletter archive and get to all of our past newsletters there if you'd be interested. The services page just describes the services that we offer here. I mentioned Beth Wade's, I mentioned mine. We certainly do great assessment services, therapy. We have medication management and therapy by some expert med providers as well. So there's a lot that we offer here, and you can learn more about that on our website. Today's topic drew a lot of inspiration from a book that's coming out next month that I had the honor of co-editing with my colleague Dr. Sharon Field, and also we contributed some chapters, but it's all about helping students make this transition to college. The Association on Higher Education and Disability, AHEAD, is publishing it. You'll see the link there for its publications page. It's supposed to come out at the end of next month, so give yourself about a month if you're interested, but then you can visit that website if you'd like to get a paperback that talks about all these issues in greater detail. Okay, at this point, let's just see, it looks like there are a few questions. The first one, the website referenced just now, collegedata.com. Okay, it was referenced earlier, and I don't see it now. I'm thinking the person just wanted me to repeat that maybe, or was there a question about that? So that website, if you just type all one word, collegedata.com, that will take you to one site that for no charge gives you the statistics on what freshmen need in order to be accepted at that school. Okay? So I hope that's helpful. And I'm going to have Jessica type that back if that's possible so that you have that. Next question, thoughts on helping the adjustment to having a roommate in a small room? Boy, and that's certainly a growing issue that the millennials are presenting. You know, practice, practice, and practice. So even though it might sound really goofy, I would encourage you even during senior year to think about appropriate sleepovers in your home, summer camp. Again, that taste of college experience, which a number of organizations run the summer after junior year, the summer after senior year. More and more students are very busy during the summer, but that's a wonderful investment in time. You typically have a roommate in that kind of experience. Those would be some practice opportunities. Another question, is there a way to listen again to this recording after today? Yes, give us about a week, and then if you go to the YouTube icon at the top of our web page, you'll find this webinar house there, and you can just play it back and listen to it at that point. And we'll keep those on our website for as long as we know, so you don't have to rush, but give us about a week to get that posted. Next question. These are great questions. Thank you. Would you suggest supporting a kid who is really wanting a single room, given that a lot of socialization happens with a roommate? Good question. There's going to be a lot of opportunity to socialize without the roommate. So your roommate is not your only option. And something I hadn't mentioned that may be relevant to this person is that some students have disability-related issues that can complicate having a roommate. Students on the autism spectrum, for example, students with Asperger's might fit into that category. Students with clinical anxiety, students with sensory issues. There just may be a number of reasons why that student is really going to be ill-equipped to have a roommate despite the potential benefits. Again, talk to your disability services office about your options and what process would need to be pursued on your campus to explore that. Next question. How can parents navigate helping their kids use support services in college without being in the high school service mind frame? I think what that's talking to is that maybe there's a different framework in college, and the Disability Services Office then say in special education, it might be getting at the fact that the student maybe hasn't used or enjoyed special education in high school, but they might still benefit from using disability services in college. Again, my first suggestion is to set up a time to go and meet with the disability services office. Do that at any college that you're exploring. Give your son or daughter or student multiple opportunities to sit down and talk with the people who run disability services office, potentially with you not being in the room, and give them a chance to really experience who these professionals are, how they interact with students, what services they can offer. That would be my biggest tip for helping the student maybe recognize, wow, for good or bad, that sounds a little different from special ed, maybe that feels a little different from special ed. They're not hearing that from you, they're hearing that from the person providing the service. That might be the most powerful way to start that process of thinking, maybe this is something I'll try. The other thing is to remind them that if they do qualify for accommodations in college, they don't have to use them. It's not a binding contract. It's like car insurance, it's there if you need it. And so if you set it up, start your freshman semester if you're determined not to use accommodations without them. But after the first round of tests, again, evaluate your experiences, be adaptable, and maybe go back and talk to the disability services people that time and say, okay, I get it now. I need extra time on my test, maybe in this class or this class. So that might be a follow-up stage we need to let students go through before they're more open to using disability services in college. Do you recommend letting a college student know if the student has a diagnosis like ADD? So do you disclose your disability? Great question. Here's a short version to a complicated answer. Don't if you don't have to. If you disclose your disability, and it's voluntary, colleges can ask, but if you choose to disclose, usually through the personal statement the student's going to write, or a recommendation letter from maybe the resource teacher in high school, then the college can consider that, and it might help explain some blips or some gaps in the student's academic profile. Maybe they did fairly well on the SAT, but they've got D's and F's in all their math classes. If the college doesn't understand that they have learning disability in math that can help explain that profile, they might make the wrong judgment about that student's interest or ability and not admit them. So if there are gaps or blips that need to be explained, I would go ahead and provide that information, but I wouldn't provide it if you don't have to. Another example is if the student was diagnosed with ADHD or just started taking medications or just qualified for accommodations maybe their junior year, and you can see that change in the transcript, but the admissions committee wouldn't understand why things suddenly started to get better unless you disclose some information. That would be another, I think, helpful and appropriate reason to disclose. We're going to take a final question here before we run out of time. And that is does CRG play a role in communicating with the Disability Center at college to help students transition? Absolutely we can if you want. We won't if you don't, right? We have to have permission. Our work here at CRG is confidential under HIPAA, but we often very much support families, and again, with your permission, provide assessment reports, letters of recommendations, or even phone calls to support the transition to college when the student has a disability. So thank you again for your participation today, for your great questions. Again, hopefully you've been able to download the PowerPoint. Jessica will be sending out the evaluation form. She can send out the PowerPoint if you didn't get that. But give us about a week, you can access that and again continue to watch or listen to this presentation on our website in the days ahead. So we welcome your involvement. We greatly prize your feedback, and thank you again for attending today.